Welcome to Disruptor in Chief, a show about the ongoing revolution in higher education. Let's hear from the main man leading the charge at Maryville University. Here's your host, Dr. Mark Lombardi.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Lombardi, and this is Disruptor in Chief, where we cover topics related to the revolution, digital revolution, here at Maryville University and throughout higher education. And we get to talk to some fascinating people who are leading that, and today is sort of maybe a highlight. I've got Phil Komarny with me. Let me give you a sense of his background and experience briefly, because if I did the whole resume thing, we'd be here for the next hour. But 25 years plus of experience developing and motivating teams, integrating new technologies that really make a difference in organizations, and particularly in higher education. Most recently, Phil served as Vice President of Innovation at Salesforce, and he focused on emerging technologies, including blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, probably warp drive. Previously, Phil served as a Chief Digital Officer for the entire University of Texas system, where he designed, developed, and managed the technical and information infrastructure, as well as stacking services that were really necessary to deliver the best online learning that the UT system could provide. And that was an extremely complicated task. We'll talk a little bit about that. Phil was in high demand as an award-winning senior executive. He's presented hundreds of times keynote addresses and presentations to executive leaders in every major sector. He's a national thought leader in the areas of digital transformation, strategic technology, new business development. He's an expert in the implementation of mobile, cloud-based, and social technology solutions. And most importantly, he is now the Chief Innovation Officer here at Maryville University. I've been trying to lasso Phil for years, and I finally got him. And so at Maryville, we're thrilled to have Phil with us. So it's just great to have you here.
Well, I'm more thrilled to be here, Mark. This is a fascinating place. I'm really proud to work here. So
well,
it's going to be a lot of fun.
Tell me about the revolution in higher ed. Where's it going?
Where's it going? Oh, wow. In a really inclusive direction. I think we're really, I think the revolution in education can be led through data. And what we've seen in the last 2 years, sitting in front of our television sets at home with COVID in our world, seeing the United States almost come apart, and we're seeing this terrible time in our history. But coming back from that, I don't think we can go back to where we were. It's going forward to where we want to go. And if we take a data approach through that, I think we can break some of those systems that kind of have precluded people from opportunity in specific zip codes or specific parts of the country. And a data approach will, give opportunity where there isn't any. And I think we have a amazing team here and have done, 10 years worth of, yeoman's work on what does it take to be a digital organization. Now, getting to that point and thinking of a strategy that really gets us to that next iteration or next evolution of what you guys have already attained. I think that's the revolution. I think we can lead it from here.
So we talk a lot about data because data is sort of at the heart, really, of all of this, right? And we've already seen over the last 20, 25, 30 years, we don't have to get negative, but some companies, some businesses emerged that have used data for all kinds of, profitable and sometimes nefarious ends. We
absolutely.
don't have to make a list of them. You all out there know what they are. How can Maryville, how can any institution use data, obviously from our students and learners, to flip that script?
Right. I think that's something that you have to expose through your values. I mean, we, coming from where I came from, Salesforce runs a thing called the V2 MOM, Visions, Values, Methods, Obstacles, and Measures. That's what it stands for. But it's a way to really expose what the company or what your culture wants to, what you value. And if you start to think about your methods through those values, I think we get to a point where we can change that a bit. So that's the I think we really got to think through how we want to build this new world or help lead this revolution. So
yeah, I mean, we talk about, and because you're a big part of this, we talk about, okay, businesses like Amazon and all these others, they collect all this data in order to provide services, sell us products and what have you, but they own our data.
Yep.
And they control it and so forth and so on. Education, we've been talking about here in Maryville, where students owning their data, students basing their journey on their own identity,
right,
and learner-centric, and which basically flips that model, right? It's not about Maryville owning the data, it's about them owning the data, being empowered and having agency around that. Yeah. How do you think, from your perspective, that changes the whole education? So you're an 18 or a 20-year-old listening to this. How does that change your educational experience going forward?
Well, I think that representation of our skills or what we're able to accomplish or who we are digitally, something that every company out there owns right now. We're products of every one of those companies. Facebook is the new cigarettes, as Mark Benioff says. I think that's, people are starting to wake up to that fact. And now we're starting to see self-sovereign identity, wallet plays, this blockchain crypto space, which is, I think, a bit noisy. And when you start to think of it that way, there's a lot of negative things you can think about. But when you start to think about how data can empower somebody across the lifetime, we teach episodically. We K through 12, higher ed, graduate school, doctor, it's all episodic. But our life is more on-ramps and off-ramps. We're constantly going to need education, but not as a big purchase at the end when we're 18 to go get our degree is one way to think about it. But I think another way to think about it is if we had a way to represent who we are through data, and we had systems that we could consent to helping guide us. So an AI that I could consent to seeing myself, my digital self, and providing me guidance. I think that pattern can really inspire people, and we can start to build systems that are much more human.
It's funny you talk about that, because I've been reading some different things about this, that for a long, long time, there's identity was who you think you are.
Right.
And then how do your family and friends view you? Mm-hmm. Now it's who you think you are, how do your family and friends view you, and how does the internet see you, or what's your digital self? And that's that third piece of identity is just as important as the others, as I understand it, in terms of how you interact with data throughout the world.
Absolutely. I think we've never seen that before. I think we're going to wake up to that fact. And, I've done a lot of work around the learner employment record, or how can we make data transient and make HR systems be a bit more easier for people to understand how they work. I mean, not limiting our success by, putting us in a bucket with understanding us through an algorithm. That's how it works today. And I think that's unfortunate. But if we have a way to, be empowered by that data, not be controlled by it. Surveillance capitalism is good and bad. I like Amazon too. Push a button and buy my stuff. But I also would like to have that type of experience around the next thing I got to learn. It's like, what do I need to be successful in my career? And why should I wait for my employer to tell me what that is? I think people can be inspired by that and go on these journeys themselves.
We at Maryville several years ago, we started down this path of the active learning ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And one of the key elements through our life coaching model is to develop a real learning profile of students that they have, that they know about, not that we own, but that they understand. Well, here's why I'm good at. Here's how the best way for me to learn math as opposed to this or this. It seems to me that what we're doing here, and we're passionate about it, and you're on the front line of this, is taking that concept and infusing it with just an enormous amount of data around the student identity, student learning, so that a student ends up, ideally, with a 360-degree profile
of themselves,
mm-hmm. and which then empowers them to say, I love numbers, but the career path is not, well, I'm just going to be an accountant or something.
Right.
You have all these different options and ways of pursuing that. It seems to me that the data in the hands of the individual mm-hmm. is empowering. In the hands of some companies, it can be exploitive.
Yep, and we see that every day, I think. And once you show somebody their information, this is what I think is interesting. We haven't seen this yet. We've seen it in studies and what we've thought of. But once you see somebody, show somebody how the internet sees them, it's like giving them the red pill in the Matrix. It's like you can't go back. It's like, wait, this is, you start to investigate your knowledge graph. And you start to understand yourself through that modality, which, surveillance capitalism does it all day long, millions of predictions every second to what we want to do next. But we should have that with our learning. We should have that with, how we want to develop ourselves, not just how we want to be marketed to.
So if as I understand it, and what we're working towards at Maryville is using data and AI, which we can talk about, to provide this 360-degree sense of self and then empower people to apply it and utilize it. It seems to me that education moves from episodic to really this lifelong journey.
Exactly. 100-year life takes a 60-year curriculum. I think, and I was involved with that in the past, and I think that is the way. We have to think through, how do we help people on their lifelong journey, not get their degree? That's something that's valuable, but I think there's a huge value proposition around that second one.
Talk about this. How does that, because I don't want anybody listening to think that means 60 years of paying $30,000 a year.
No.
So how does it change the business model of education?
Oh, wow. Not just education. I think when you take a person and their data and put them at the edge of that system where they can control their own information, it changes every system. It doesn't just change education. But having that ability to see somebody or allow them to present themselves to you, that really allows us to understand them in a much deeper way than just say, hey, fill out this application and we're going to understand you through that mechanism, instead of this is how they see themselves. And they've put some time and effort into understanding themselves. That would be an unbelievable way to understand what that next step should be for that person.
It sounds like going from a real profile of your real self to some sort of fake dating profile that people put up.
Exactly. No, it should be, we want to make it like LinkedIn's full of lies. Let's just say it. I mean, it's a great resource. A lot of people, it's so noisy now I can't even use it. I mean, after leaving Salesforce, there's 1,000 inbound emails a day. I don't read them. It's just constant noise. It's a marketing engine because we don't own that information. But that type of mechanism with digital reputation, where there's something that I actually value, I think we got to put that learner at the center of that journey over a lifetime, not just while they're here at Maryville. So
and it seems, well, I know that, and this is fundamental to what we've been doing and trying to do here at Maryville, this also really truly levels the playing field in terms of access and opportunity.
Absolutely.
It changes the affordability issue overnight, certainly not only of higher education, potentially of healthcare and a number of other things, but it also truly levels the playing field in the sense that it won't matter in that kind of a world.
Right.
With that kind of empowered identity, it won't matter what zip code you came
That's
from.
right.
Or anything of the sort.
Yep, Paul LeBlanc. He basically says, talent's distributed, opportunity isn't. And, they've a model to go after that idea. And I think that empowering people with their data in any zip code, like the Opportunity Atlas, the work that Harvard did around showing a 40-year longitudinal study, the most predictive data point for our American life is our zip code. That's fascinating to me, and that's unfortunate. We can, I think, through data and through this approach, we can drive that kind of change with any zip code, because it's really just giving everybody the same opportunity, not saying that everybody's going to progress at the same rate or have the same success. Just level the playing field for once, and let's see what happens.
By the way, I would suspect, even though we didn't have zip codes, that if you went back through history, the same data point would be true. Where you were born was a determining factor
100%.
in opportunity.
100%.
Talk a little bit about, because a lot of people understand, at least on a certain level, data analytics. They've seen Moneyball. Their favorite team uses data analytics in sports or whatever the case may be, and probably find it interesting and fascinating. Talk about the role of AI in data analytics, because it's not just a file drawer full of data, right? We're talking about real sophisticated ways of sort of graphing and analyzing. And talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, seeing what you don't know. I mean, there's so much information that we capture. I mean, here and everywhere. I mean, I've seen data stores that are unbelievably huge. It's amazing how much data we emit. But data is nothing but an artifact of a human experience. And that's, Beth Rudin from IBM's quote, and I love giving her credit for it because it's a beautiful quote. And I think if we start to think of data that way, instead of how we're currently thinking of data around control, we start to have a new way to capture it and a new way to employ AIs to help us see what that future looks like. Because I think the data we capture in this vertical, well, in education, it's all defined by the vendors, either a learning information system or an SIS or student information system. Any of those things are seen through the lens of a university's business model. I'm just going to say it. So if we think of data again as a human experience, as an artifact of that, what do we really want to know about that experience? Not what that system's telling us. Seat time in front of an LMS means nothing. But what could we really get from that experience to make that next data point visible to us or to that person to share it with us so we can actually motivate them through that next step?
Well, and I think that, we've seen this in Maryville's experience, right? So when we went down this road of active learning ecosystem, developing learning profiles based on a series of diagnostic tools we have, not standardized tests, but some sophisticated diagnostics. And we shared all of that with the student, right? We didn't hold out,
right.
We shared it. What we found was it was amazing. It was almost all positive revelation, meaning we heard all things all the time. Well, I never realized why I really enjoyed doing this is because of X, and an understanding of who they are, an understanding of what skill sets they have, an understanding of why they learn the way they learn, because everybody learns differently, which is very important, fundamental assumption of all of this. And what that led to, really, particularly for students from those zip codes, students of color and students from other areas that didn't have opportunities growing up, it was automatically empowering.
Yep.
Immediately it was, I like playing video games, and I can design games, I can do this, I can do this,
right.
I can do this.
Right.
And it was amazing, the talent or the potential talent that was unleashed. And so just in a rudimentary sort of way, now we're talking about utilizing this amazing power of data analytics, and AI to unleash that for everyone. Mm-hmm. Do you think, from where you sit and looking forward, that this is going to you mentioned revolutionizing everything. So let's talk a little bit outside of education, healthcare, other verticals. Yeah. How do you see this revolutionizing?
I think anytime you can change the way a system is built by allowing the user of that system to represent themselves in that system with data. And this is what the verifiable credential standard the World Wide Web Consortium has finally put out, and things like that allow us to allow data to be transient with a person. So every system I've ever seen or built includes a data moat and a way to kind of manage that data where, okay, now we have to allow somebody we have enough of a value to allow somebody to present that information to us because it's a different relationship. It changes everything. But the problem, why I think education is going to experience that first is because healthcare and finance, those data sets there's tertiary markets that are billions of dollars that are leveraging that data for one thing or another. I think we're not going to see that first. There's too much incumbents there. So if we look at human progression and development and that data set where really we use it here to really help our students get through our university structure, but what does a lifelong journey look like? And if we can let that data be resonant with that person and constantly be massaged and understood as a value for that person, when they share it with us, we just have a better way to service them. I think that pattern of allowing somebody to represent themselves digitally, think of it in any vertical, it's going to change. Why would I have to go to the doctor and fill out another clipboard full of information with a pen? I mean, really. I mean, it's frustrating as hell.
The same clipboard, the same pen.
That my dad used. I mean, and his dad used. It's insane that we still do that. And they don't have to. That's all. I think it's all comes down to legality and why they're making us fill that form out again. But I think we've evolved a little bit, and we can get past that.
Well, okay, so let's switch gears a little bit because I'm a recovering political scientist, right? That's where I started, and I'm in recovery. So, a little preamble. Back 60, 70, 80 years ago, we had the technology to be able to build electric cars, and the car companies and those who had a vested interest in the combustion engine bought up a lot of those patents and have been sitting on them.
Yep.
And now, of course, finally move in that direction. So what we're talking about here, what you're talking about here, it can fundamentally alter the entire sort of data ownership model that Facebook and Amazon and everybody has built.
Yeah, right.
What's going to prevent them from doing the same thing?
Their business models.
Yeah.
They can't break them. I don't think they can. I mean, Facebook's rebranded themselves to Meta, trying to. I just don't know if that level of.
No, I'm sort of getting at this. What happens when we do this here, and they come in? They're going to come in and want to make sure that it's a fire that doesn't spread.
Yeah, and see, this is what decentralization is. That's why I love blockchain. I love that, not so much Bitcoin, blockchain, but the concept of empowering people. And, started in finance, started with Bitcoin, started with banking, and that's super scary to people. And we see it every day. It's a volatile space, but allowing that technology to be implemented in a way that doesn't control people, but lets people control themselves where they didn't have a way to have any control. That's how I see blockchain enabling this new Web3, where everybody's calling it Web 3.0 and things like that, where you get down the rabbit holes with NFTs and all these other things. But let's come up with a solution that actually leverages that architecture in a positive way, not to go out and sell the next 10,000 NFTs to make $1 billion. That's not what this is about. It's more about, this is a really important time in our history. I really believe that. I think we have one chance to get this right. It could go a different way as well.
Well, being immersed in higher ed all these years, and I know you've been in higher ed for an extensive part of your career, higher ed has always been a scarcity model, right?
Yeah.
It's limited by all kinds of factors, cost and access and admissions and standardized, and all these things that frankly are artificial creations of a few to sort of exclude. It seems to me what we're talking about here is the opposite for education. It's an abundance model.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it really makes it accessible to everyone.
Yep.
And not simply. We're not talking about 18-year-olds or 22. Again, that lifelong journey. So let's talk a little bit about how do you think education providing or providers are going to change? Like, you're privy to how Maryville is changing, but how do you think institutions are going to adapt to this?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't think it's going to be a choice to adapt. It's going to be a necessity. That's what COVID has showed us. I think there's digital first now is a thing. I don't think we're ever going to come out of not feeling what we just went through. Like, there's always going to be in the back of our mind. So with digital first out there, I don't even know how to even answer that question.
Well, I think, we can talk, of course, about, the industry will be changed completely, and some will make it and some will not. But I'm more curious about, and speculating, right? Because we're just, we're kind of projecting out. But the notion of, let's take the notion of faculty, right? We've got content experts, and let's face it, we're always going to have content experts to one degree or another.
Sure.
Human and potentially down the road AI content experts that exist. But how do you think it'll change the nature of how people conceive of themselves as content experts, which is faculty? I was a content expert at one time.
Wow, I think there's a big opportunity there for content experts, because I think this next version of what we're talking about, you want to do education at scale to really help out a lot of people. It's going to be a content play. It's about how do we take what we call a course and put it into a system that's constantly being able to be updated, where the people that create that content see themselves and can manage that content and really can evolve it. Right now, we build a course, and that's how we manage our content. That's how most places think of content in academic space. But I think we should really think of, in this space, how content's seen like NPR or CNN, or content can be pushed through any type of interface, and they're going to keep changing. The device is going to change, the screen size is going to change. We have to break formatting from text. So all of our content can be pushed into any kind of space. So those kind of processes, that kind of technology is going to be needed, where we can take the services that we deliver and allow those to scale. When we think about how we can develop courses faster and deliver things in just in time, the next module that student and their data actually can see they need could be produced in real time almost, but how do we service that?
Yeah, I've been talking for a while about the idea that what's coming is organic curriculum, what I would call organic curriculum, which is the real-time adaptation, just not unlike video games, sophisticated video games, where you get through level 1, you move to level 2 and level 3, the game shifts and changes and all the rest. Yeah, that's right. And so, but when I think about learning and the learner, because that's any educator, everything starts and begins and ends with the learner. If you think about learning, if I think about the way I was taught or you were taught, we took a course, we were tested, we wrote papers, and at the end we got an evaluation. And if we were lucky, during the course, we got a sense of how we were doing. You know, hey, Phil, you're passing. Hey, Mark, you're flunking, you know, which is probably what it was back in those days, you passing and me flunking. But there was never, ever a time for the learner, it seems to me, where you really had an adaptive, accurate kind of feel and touch for the process. There was always an uncertainty at the end about how you were going to do. This, the data model we're talking about, the shift, really allows people to not just own that learning process, but own it in real time and really know.
Understand it.
And understand it.
Yeah, I think that guidance, that view, I'm struggling for language sometimes around this stuff, because it's like a whole new thing, and I don't want to do what we did before, where create an LMS and call it Blackboard, because that's what we used to use.
Yeah.
I think we have to break those connotations of what does that mean, and how does that empower people? And I think this generation of learners, like coming up now, they have a whole different view of data, and I think they will understand what we're trying to promote and show them. I think it's a moral imperative for education right now to step into the digital world and say, this is how it should work. Yeah. Like, this is how we have to understand this, or it's going to keep going down this really ugly pathway, I think.
Well, I've been saying since the advent of the internet and in the early 90s when I was teaching, that instead of higher ed observing all of this digital world and sort of judging and commenting on it, we should be embracing it and utilizing it to really profoundly not only educate a few, but educate millions and millions of people and empower them.
That's why you're the disruptor in chief, my friend. That's why I'm here. Because this is that what you just said is the start of the change. Somebody has to kind of lead it. And I think what Maryville has done and what you've led, we got to that point where now it's time to do that. Because technology is caught up to where the conversation is. People now understand how broken our data world is. I really believe that. And we're seeing it through crypto markets and all this decentralization, all these NFTs. It's just a tell. It's not the answer. It's just, I think we're ready to hear a different way to treat data.
It's fascinating to watch social media companies, which for several years, even though they're relatively new, for several years are always ranked highly in terms of respect and usability and all these things of people. And now they're starting to be ranked right up there with lawyers and others in terms of lack of trust.
Deservingly so.
Deservingly so, yes. I mean, I think we've seen too much evidence that they deserve that.
Yeah.
I think that as an individual, right, just a person out there who's on whatever learning journey they are, whether it's a young person or a worker wanting to skill, train up, and all the rest of it, things always seem to work best for people when they can contextualize it in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking to somebody who's a 25-year-old accountant out there who has a sneaking suspicion that they don't want to be an accountant for the next 50 years.
Okay.
And we're doing what we're doing, and we're completely disrupting this system around data and identity and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to that person about what does it mean for them for the next 20, 30 years of their learning journey, their career, their life? What does it mean?
For accountants, I think it's a huge opportunity because I think accountancy is going to be something that's going to be automated very quickly. Like those kind of processes that computers can do a lot better than us are not humane jobs for people to have. Google, I was at a recent conference where somebody who from Google talked about how they're redefining how they work too. Any process that can be done by a computer is never given to a human because it's inhumane. It's not. You shouldn't let somebody do that work anymore. So I think accountants and people in professions that have a lot of vulnerability to information technology should use that data that they have skills and things, but how do you see, what are you passionate about? What do you want to go after? It's not about getting another degree to do that. It's a next step in that journey. And if we being education, Maryville, everybody can start to think that way, that's where I think we can quell all the fear that's going to happen around, technology overtaking some of these roles, and how are we going to, as humans, participate. I think the creativity that we have and the ability to think differently, machines aren't there yet, but we should really focus on growing those muscles. And where does that lead us?
Well, people will ask sometimes, well, if there's automation, accountants, and all these different people, what are those people going to do? And I said, look, this is not the first time in human history this has happened.
Right.
So everybody who used to deliver an ice truck in the 1920s and 30s when refrigerators came in or whatever, they didn't just go away. They moved it. They delivered something else. They moved into something else.
Right.
And I think that it is not only incumbent, I think it's a moral imperative for universities, and Maryville does this through Maryville Works, to provide the kinds of call them certificates, badges, training programs that take people with skill sets and help move them into areas where, and again, if they've got a real clear sense of their identity and they're owning their data and whatever, they can move them into other areas where they, like you say, you don't have to go back and get a 4-year degree or a graduate degree. You can move through with some training and skill development.
Absolutely. And an accountant, great math person. There's a lot of data science roles. There's a lot of data ethics roles. There's a lot of things that didn't exist when got that accountant degree. So it's always going to change. We just have to be comfortable with change.
Well, my brother was trained as an actuary back in the dark ages of the 20th century. And I know for a fact he loves sports, and he said to me many times, if I was alive today, I would take my love of numbers and statistics or whatever and do data analytics for the Boston Red Sox or someone.
Yeah, it contextualizes what he really wants, like his profession. So I think we can create what I think I'd call the context academy. So people that are accountants, they have a context for their life. How do they see themselves in our curriculum? Not through a degree, but through what's the next step they want to take. Get them on a journey, and let's just deliver value to them constantly. I think there's a lot of people that would like to do that.
Well, I think, too, what COVID has brought out, and we've heard about the Great Resignation, right?
Yeah,
and people questioning and reevaluating and moving to other jobs or leaving the workforce, whatever. I like to dream about this world, which I believe is, we're building right now over the next 12 to 18 months. But this world that we're talking about would be the kind of place where anybody can see themselves not having to work 40 years to support their family in one job and never leaving it, no matter how much you hate it or you hate your supervisor or what have you. But rather, I can, in this context academy notion that you've put out there, they can see themselves moving every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, into different kinds of things based on their own knowledge of their own context.
That's exactly right. And I think some people will be doing 7 jobs at once. I mean, it's not going to be I don't think career is going to feel like I work for one company in the future. I think it's more about the work I'm really good at and I love to do that's making my life fulfilled. And how does that translate to needs in the market? Instead of me being, a VP at a company and just doing that function for a company and seeing my value there. I think that's something that's the gig economy, and people want to live where they want to live today and do.
We're certainly seeing that with young people.
Yeah,
I mean, they're in that world, even though they may not have it be fully empowered with their own data. And as we talked about before, they definitely have that ethos of a gig economy and moving around. And I get people saying all the time, okay, automation, AI, all these things, and what am I going to do? And I always say to them, put on Star Trek, because on Star Trek, that computer on that ship does all kinds of stuff. It's amazing, right? It can analyze every speech by, Dr. Martin Luther King and tell you all these things and so on and so on. They still need people to do an amazing amount of, as you say, human action, human behavior, human jobs.
Right, or why even put them on the ship? Just let the ship go by itself.
That's right. Well, nobody would watch that ship.
That's exactly right. So that's not an interesting future if we do that.
No.
I agree with you.
So let's spin out a little bit. We're approaching 2030, basically 7-8 years away.
Amazing.
It'll be here before we know it. Mm-hmm. Is it your view, and I know this because we spent a lot of time talking about it, that education in general is going to be not just profoundly changed, but profoundly expanded and democratized, for lack of a better term, not just in this country, but beyond. We're not just talking about St. Louis or the United States. We're talking about, and in that sense, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yay.
There you go. How do you think it's going to change humanity's interactions, our interactions with each other, just the way human beings interact when they are fully empowered to access things that right now a lot of people don't feel that they can access at all for financial and all kinds of other reasons?
Right. Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer to that, but I'll give it. I think empowering people with that information, we don't know what it's going to do. I've seen it in pilots, and I've experienced that with test groups and built systems that give people that power. It's always been super impressive what comes out of it. So at scale, I dare to even dream what that would look like. But I think when people see themselves in that digital world, like we see ourselves in our analog world right now. This is me. There's only one of me. I think they're going to have a different way to represent themselves there, and it's going to change the way all these systems need to work because people are going to demand it. Instead of waiting for Facebook to give us our identity, we'll be waiting here for another 1,000 years. It's not going to happen. But if we have a reason to demand it, and I think opportunity through learning and development is a great way to think about that. It's not about a social network that's going to, give everybody their data. But good luck. It's been tried. I think if we go after something that gives people a value that's constant, that's where we have a chance to show them how that empowering data gives them that opportunity. And that opportunity is hard to put away.
And again, the throwing the politics hat on for a minute and not taking a position on the political spectrum, but it also, it seems to me, not totally eliminates, but it really mitigates various groups and individuals trying to exploit and manipulate people's views or their values or their emotions around political issues of whatever, right or left. I'm not taking sides, just saying the ability of people. If you control data, you can manipulate people. We've seen it with Facebook. We've seen it with political parties around the world. We've seen it. If they control their data, it seems to me they have the greatest ability to defend against that. We'll always have demagogues. We'll always have people trying to control other people's ideas or what have you. But it gives people an effective tool to combat that.
It does, and it'd be the opposite of what's happening in China right now, like where they have a social credit system and things like that around data, where they're using it to control and run their country. That's another way to think about it. I don't want to live in that country. I think I want to live in a country where we are free and we can see this and have an opportunity to express freedom through data. And that's something that's never been done before. Data is owned by other people. It's never owned by you. There's not one piece of data that I can think of that I own, including this phone. This is...
Well, I'm not being flippant when I say this. We may indeed get to a point, and this is a positive look at the future, where one of the fundamental human rights is to own your own data.
Oh, wow, don't get me started. But yeah, I actually worked on a project called Humanity, humanity.co, that was thinking about setting up the 31st human right, which would be data as property. Didn't go far, but we did create a lot of conversation about that. And I think we might get there someday. But, the internet was intended without an identity layer, so was built that way. But I don't think Vint and the people that went down this road, Tim Berners-Lee, really thought that trillions of dollars of business was going to be transacted on this thing. Mm-hmm. Now we really have to start to reel that in a bit and think about how we can do that with people involved, not as products. And this is, again, through learning, might be a great vector to show that off through. So,
well, it certainly, whether it's education, learning, or healthcare, or some of these others, it certainly has the greatest possibility of bringing about the kind of positive change that we're talking about. Because, whether it's education out, they're think of it, they're products that everyone needs to consume.
Yeah.
Either at various stages of their life or throughout their life.
Right.
So,
and how can we enhance that through a service around education that's scalable? I mean, right now, what we do is really hard to scale because of the way we treat data, not just here at Maryville, everywhere. I'm just saying in this vertical, it's used to run the business. It's not used to inspire. And I think we can get to that very quickly and show people their future, not in 4 years, but over the next 40.
Let's come back to ground zero here. What are you working on at Maryville right now?
Oh, wow. Nothing. No. Yeah. No, a lot. This place is fascinating. I've been inserted to an amazing leadership team and doing a lot of interesting work thinking about how student information systems can become actionable. And we're I don't know how much you want me to share, but this is, I think we're going to show, not tell our future progress in a few months, and let the world see how Maryville thinks about student data and what we can do if we think differently about that.
Well, I think that, and for the purposes, we've got a lot of fascinating stuff coming that there'll be other podcasts about. Yeah. We'll spend some time talking, but I do think one of the things that needs to be said, and you've added a great deal to the team in this area, is doing something that, and I'm just going to say it, most universities have never done. They pay lip service to, they've never done. Is if you start with this model that we've been outlining, it is completely learner focused, and not learner focused that, how do I do this to a student, a learner, provide them with this, whatever, but rather, how does a learner see the experience? And learners are all different, of course, so it's personalized. And then how do you develop, as you put it, systems and so forth that capture that dimension? The learner truly at the center, at the center.
Absolutely. I think the approach we're taking is, Maryville doesn't have a mobile application just yet. But what we're thinking about employing here is a language around how we want to communicate with our learners over their lifetimes, not, hey, we want to put a mobile app here that shows them where all our services are. That is so wrong. What we want to do is have a way to communicate with them, not just while they're here, but forever. And let's start to define that data approach that right now doesn't reside in our student information system or our learning management system by themselves. It's combined into a place where we want to understand the context of that data and how it's going to inspire that next step of that journey. Not what the vendors have given us in a log file, but what does that log file actually mean? So we want to start asking the questions about how our learning happens and what is the result of that, and how do we want to capture that to allow our students to see that progression, and let's react to that. Let's give them that next step. I think that's much better than a curriculum. Like, it literally is better than a course catalog, where I'm involved in my learning. That's active learning. I think I'm totally involved now. It's not just what I'm being delivered, it's how I'm taking the next step.
Well, and this is a really simplistic analogy, but I was thinking about this just the other day. Love to cook. There's all these cooking programs out there, and there's all YouTube videos, whatever. So basically, you don't need to buy a book and read about, what you can experiment. You can do all kinds of things. Now, there's guides, there's facilitators, there's people that you like or whatever that you. But the reality is, it becomes a completely personalized process. So you're following what somebody's doing, but you want to put a little more pepper, a little this, a little. But, and I've always felt like education should work that way. Not where we're sitting in rows of desks, staring at one person and listening and trying to take notes but rather you're empowered and you own it and you can create out of that experience. Yes, you have content experts who are facilitators, faculty, you have this, you have that. Right. But that creativity breeds a kind of ownership and engagement that you can't possibly capture in any other way.
That's true.
So during COVID, I'm just spin this simplistic tale a little bit. I went into COVID enjoying cooking, and now I'm passionate about it. And I'm not passionate about it because I read a book about it. I'm passionate about it because I wasn't going to restaurants. I was cooking. Yeah. You're doing all, and the more I did, the more passionate I became about it, and the more engaged, and the more I learned about everything. Wow. So and that's always been even when I was a faculty member in the 80s and 90s, it always seemed to me that it was very, very hard to get students to develop the passion and ownership because the communication channel was largely one way, right? Yeah. It was between me to them, and that, what it really should be is, and I've got this quote up in my office, lighting a fire. Yeah. And once that fire's lit, nothing will stop it.
Can't put it out. I reflect on my own journey. I didn't go to college because I graduated in 1985 out of high school, and the internet started. Like, this is the reason I'm here. I mean, I took it and just ran with it, learned how to program, started an ISP, got all the, my whole life started when the internet started, and nobody was teaching it. And I think right now there are a bazillion different technologies and things that we need to teach that don't exist right now. Mm-hmm. But how can we capture like that passion that I had where I saw this new thing? I had probably a predefined journey. My parents own a very large greenhouse business, so it was like more generational. I was going to go do that. But having something where somebody can find themselves in, and let that happen. My parents pushed me though. See, I had somebody there like, oh yeah, you should keep doing that. That piece, we can scale that piece where people on that journey can just get a little nudge and say, you're doing the right thing, keep going. Well, that changes the world. That's really a big deal. So I think that's where we're going with it, where it's more around how do we scale the service around this, the service of teaching. Because I would have loved to learn programming the right way. I learned it my way, which is, I know it's wrong, but it got me to where I'm at. But looking back now, I've taken, I don't know how many MOOCs, how many courses, how much I've read. Yeah, it validated everything I kind of learned myself. But if there was a structured way for me to reach out and ask that question, I would have gladly paid for that. So it would have saved me time and validated my findings. There's no way you can stop a learner like that. That you can't. So let's just empower that to happen and then service it. And I think we can get to that.
And I think that, and to wrap this in this way, I think the model we're talking about, you've been talking about with the learner at the center, with data and data ownership and that 360-degree view that the student or the learner owns and has an understanding of, that will be the fire that will unleash the change that we're talking about. So in that context, this podcast is part one with Phil.
Oh, wow.
And
awesome.
we're going to have part two sometime in 2022. And let me just say this to our listeners and anyone out there. We'll have a lot to talk about, but more importantly, we'll have a lot to show.
That's right. We're going to show, not tell. I'm sick of telling. It's time to show. It really is.
Well, I want to thank Phil for joining us. Thank all of you who are listening, and stay tuned. We'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Disruptor in Chief. Please share this episode with people in your network who might benefit from it. We'll see you next time.